The Consumer Bankers Association is pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Navigating New Threats in Digital Transformation, How to Prepare with a Focus on Fraud and KYC, presented by Alloy. My name is Isabella, and it is my pleasure to facilitate today's event. Thank you for joining. Please note we are recording and all participant lines are muted. If you have any trouble, please email conferences@consumerbankers.com or send a message in the Q&A box. This presentation will last up to 60 minutes and will include a question and answer opportunities at the end. You may submit a question at any time by entering the questions into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. As a reminder, the views expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and do not represent the views of CBA or its members. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers: Sarah Seguin, Principal Advisor of Fraud and Identity Risk at Alloy; Jennifer Yeager, Director of Financial Crimes Compliance at Valley Bank; and Stuart Cook, Chief Product Officer at Valley Bank. Welcome.
Thank you, Isabella, and thank you everyone for joining. We're super excited to be here with you today. So with that and the intros being done, we will dive right in. First up is just a short, brief agenda so everyone knows what we're going to talk about today. The power of digital transformation. We hear it all across in a lot of different forums. Public, I'm sure it's talked about a lot in your institution. So we're going to talk through transformation, the different types of transformation. We will then get into a fireside chat with Valley Bank. We will talk about their journey. They will share with us, how they achieved success, maybe some of the challenges that they had along the way, but ultimately providing keys to success and tools that maybe you can use for your institution as well. Then we will move into how Alloy can help you to achieve success along your transformation journey. And we will end with a Q&A session. So please, as Isabella mentioned, if you do have questions along the way, please submit those, and we're looking forward to it. So with that, the power of digital transformation. I want to talk about bank transformation and take it up just even one level higher as we think about the different types of transformation. So when you think about transformation, I think probably most commonly we hear digital transformation, but also, it really is technical. You can have originations, you can have fraud transformation, risk transformation. Ultimately, the concept of transformation is that dramatic and radical change that's going to take place across your institution, whether it is to future-proof your institution and some of your architecture, or maybe it is to replace core systems. It's really that change. And so when banks take a step back and they look at a transformation project, oftentimes they're going to have it be a strategic investment and it's going to align to a pillar. So if they're going to set aside a large portion of funds, then you'll have a pillar. And, in order to really rally the firm around this transformation project that the bank is so heavily investing, the question then becomes why, right? The client expectations, growth and revenue, transformation, whether it is client-facing from a digital standpoint, or maybe it's behind the scenes to help with risk. Clients have expectations that banks will move swiftly. They have, that instant gratification, that instant experience that if they want to complete it quickly from their phone, they can. They might not have to go to a brick and mortar, but then also that there's trust and security, and that their information is safe, and the communication that they're having with their institution is really trusted. And this is also important because when we think about where we're going as, really in industry and what prospects expect, this will help to drive the growth in revenue. So how do you attract the more clients? In order to continue growing different channels, maybe you want to have more feature and functionality, open new business segments along with providing those digitally, which will really help with your growth and revenue standpoint. So what we are hearing, everything I mentioned, which aligns into the customer expectations, ultimately the way you're looking at and what you're hearing from clients and their expectations, while also being competitive in the landscape, looking at what your peers are doing and wanting to make sure that you can provide also something, within your framework and provide what clients expect. Innovate technology. There are so many vendors out there, a lot of different solutions and platforms to help you along your journey. And so all of the innovation that's being done, it will then lend itself into who will you select, what will help you in the future so that you can invest now, but it will help you in decades to come. And then that investment in security and risk. If we go back 2 decades in time, the view on security and risk was a lot different than it is today. And so how can we ensure that we're making that security and in risk investment, but being proactive with it, not necessarily that it is an investment where it's only made almost when it's too late or when losses are occurring or when there's an incident, that there is proactive investments being made in this space, even if it's part of transformation, and then lending itself into cost reduction, profitability increase. Ultimately, how can there be a cost reduction if there's something, and maybe even time, that was taking a long time to be done, perhaps by a laborious process with many people? Is it something that can be automated, and then shifting your resources to something that perhaps is on a backlog? And so all of this can lend itself to transformation. This is what we're hearing. But again, we'll talk about digital, but I did want to start with just transformation in general. And I think we'll see it in many different forms. So I want to dive in. I would love for folks to really engage here on the first polling question. And so we hear different things. I shared, what we're hearing, but I would love to hear where you are at as well in your journey. So if your firm is currently in the process of a digital transformation project, what is the primary goal? What is really standing up on your business case? Client experience, replacement of legacy systems, innovate with new technology, efficiency gain in back office process, or security and risk investment? And understanding that maybe for some of you, when you have your business case, it's hitting on multiple reasons here. But I think if you could select one primary goal, we would love to see what is your top of mind for you in order and what you really want to achieve. Client experience. So this is fantastic. So 52% of respondents are really, the primary goal is client experience. And so I want to, I really want to hone in here, Stuart, and then Jen, what are your thoughts? What are your initial thoughts? And are you surprised by the top item being client experience?
No, I'm not surprised. I think, when you consider the experience that clients have with your institutions, it actually is often a reflection of many of the other things that you have listed underneath here. So, if my back office processes are highly manual and inefficient, then actually my customer experience can suck pretty badly. And likewise, if we're sat on old legacy systems, some parts of that. So I think one of my sort of reflections on that is starting with the customer is definitely the right place to start, but we have to be careful that we're not just putting lipstick on the proverbial pig.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think it aligns probably with some of Valley's priorities as well, or focus on the client experience. I think I'm surprised though that I didn't see a little bit more folks focused on efficiency gain and back office processes. I know sometimes there's a lot of focus on the front end, and sometimes we let that back end lag a little bit. So a little surprised there's not a little bit more focus on creating some efficiency in the back office. But as Stuart said, it probably all starts with the client experience and then stems from there.
That's great. Thank you both. And thank you everyone who responded. I think, as Jen said, that also means that the efficiency gain, but then a little bit surprising, but the client experience, if that's the primary goal, then are there subsections below that in order to ensure that multiple items are being achieved as part of the broader project. So the digital banking report came out, and late 2022, Financial Brand did a great article on it. And one of the things that they did was your organization's progress on the following items for your digital transformations over the past year, so broadly over 2022. And as I was looking through this and reading this article, there were a few things that jumped out at me in different ways. And so embracing digital banking leadership and culture, 51% moderate progress, but it's 34% on significant progress. And so what I've been hearing a lot recently from different leaders is the culture that has to help with transformation projects. And one leader in particular talked about as they started their project, there was not a lot of excitement and really hard to get folks on board. And they took a step back and they realized that culture has to be a part of the transformation project and part of the digital banking leadership team. When they took a step back, refocused, a little bit of rebranding, that really helped internally them to propel forward. And so I think it's really interesting when you look at these numbers, 34% is significant progress in this item. Another one that I thought was really interesting was the transforming legacy core systems. So 35% sitting at no progress, and thinking about how they are mammoth core systems that they have been around for a really long time, and they have so many different pieces plugged in. And so it isn't just a easy rip and replace. I mean, it really is probably a multi-year, methodical, strategic investment that has to be made in order to start to make improvements in this space. So I want to pause because those were kind of the things that started jumping out at me. But Stuart, especially coming from the digital standpoint, what are your thoughts here? Is this what you would expect to align to?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, if you ask me, I tend to talk about cultural transformation as being the key tenet to a digital transformation, to be honest with you. So if I think about the areas that you need to address, banks are odd places sometimes to work in, and you think about the kind of short-term horizon that many banks are working to. We're in earnings season right now, so lots of banking executives are thinking quarter by quarter, and certainly tend to be thinking in terms of annual cycles. And actually, when you think of a digital transformation, it's definitely a journey. In fact, I'll probably take you to task calling it a project, because in my mind, projects have start and stop dates. You embark on a transformation. It's a journey that keeps going. There's not a destination in that sense. And so the nature of banks and that kind of short-termism is very hard on that. And then the way that banks control against that in the ways of working, it really gets to the nub of the cultural transformation that needs to take place. So, decisions by committee, all the sort of planning and project management that needs to take place. And often that's a result of the complexity. So we get very uncomfortable with the complexity of the systems and the complexity of the change. And so we put all of this kind of overhead on top of that, whereas you might contrast that with the kind of startup ethos of building a lot quicker and in shorter iterations. I think, again, there's a lot of tension around that. And we have to manage quite often across silos in organizations as well. So I'm talking here just about the product silos, from our mortgage teams to our credit card teams to our lending platforms to our deposit platforms to our commercial products and services. Quite often those are not just siloed organizations, the technology stacks are siloed. So trying to transform that drives a lot, I think, in terms of making a change in the way culturally you deal with that as a challenge. And that's certainly been our experience at Valley.
So Stuart, I greatly appreciate the context there. And I love that you said that it's not necessarily a project, because a project would have start and end dates. And you're absolutely correct, right? That it really is, it's an evolution. It is a journey that will just continue and with many multiple milestones. But do you ever really hit that end line, right? Because you have to continue to make more investments and keep up with the changing environment. And the culture surrounding that is a key component in order to really align, even beyond, as you're saying, beyond the digital. It's broader than that. It's an organization to bring silos together and really.
It certainly is. So if you think about what best practices might look like here, they're kind of the antithesis to quite often the way that we kind of revert to working in banks. But to really think about some of these opportunities as persistent opportunities to which we're constantly going to refine and baking our learnings means that that's a dedicated cross-functional team working on that, including all areas, some of the ones you alluded to earlier. So like my colleague here, Jen, being very involved at the very beginning of some of this, and then consistently involved through the iterations that we go on, our security team, our risk teams, and so on. It's a real cross-functional effort. Whereas I think, when I think about projects, they can be cross-functional, but they tend to be very fungible, right? So we've all been on projects where people get swapped in and out, and people aren't consistently and persistently working together on an opportunity, and they quite often get disbanded, right, at the point that we've considered the project done. And I think that's one of the key kind of indicators to me in that you're going through that cultural transformation, is you're starting to think about these opportunities as persistent.
That's great. That's just great. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could, I'd love to just add on that real quick too. And I think just to key on some of what Stuart said, it is, I think, looking at this from the risk side, which is where I come from, I do think culture is a big part of this transformation. It can be really challenging when you take, a 90-something-year-old financial institution with a lot of legacy thinking, maybe a lot of hard lessons learned, and try to introduce some of this innovation into the mix. So I think it is really important that culture is a focus of some of that transformation. I also think some of what Stuart was saying, also really important to building that culture is engaging a cross-functional team and aligning on sort of the direction, the goals and the strategy to create a sense of ownership, right? So you don't want this sort of one-time set it and forget it approach where, as these people come in and out of the mix, right, there's not sort of this the sense of ownership or rooting for success of the project, right? And I think by, engaging a more cross-functional team on a persistent basis, everybody's got a sense of ownership in that project, whether it comes from risk or your operational back office or your front lines, right? So I think culture is a big part of that. So not surprised to see a focus on that. Also, as a bank going through a legacy core transformation is really heavy lift. So I'm not surprised there's not a lot of progress there.
Which is a great call out, Jen. And I think I love what you talked about. Yes, it's the culture, but it's this ongoing collaboration and partnership that it cannot just be you have a project, the lines end, the team is disbanded, that you really have to have that ongoing collaboration for the future projects, products, not projects, how about products, new features, functionality, which really lends itself into the next polling question. Because a lot of times what we hear is that we cannot launch new products or features because we need to either go through a transformation, whether it's digital or risk. And so would love to know, is this true for you? Is this true for your institution? So is the need for digital or risk transformation holding you back from launching new products or features? We'll give everyone a moment to respond. That's a very high number. So 63% came back and said, yes, the need for digital risk transformation is holding them back from launching new products or features. So I would love, again, Stuart and Jen, I probably ask you to weigh in maybe a little bit differently here from two different points of view. But so Stuart, I'll start with you. When you think about transformation or initiative that would need to be completed so you could launch a new product, have you just heard, even in your experience, that there has been an angle to, I'm going to say Band-Aid. Let's Band-Aid it. Let's just do something to get us through so we can still launch this new product, versus taking a step back and really going back to root cause and maybe a transformation?
Yes. Yeah, of course, I have a lot of empathy for that as well. Like, so my background is a couple of startups, and quite often we do things on that journey to test and learn, and then go back on. And so I've had the pleasure of being a CTO in my past, and there's a term amongst technologists called technical debt, which is where you take these kind of shortcuts to do things, and you inherit debt in your system. Sometimes I think it's acceptable. I think if you go in open eyes and you know why you're doing it, and you want to incorporate those learnings, and then do the strategic right thing, then I understand why, and have done that myself. I think the danger is when you operate like that consistently, and you're not incorporating the learnings, and you're not putting in the strategic solution, you just make, you compound that technical debt, and you can compound the pain further on. So it's not just that, that your risk increases here. It's that you make change harder and harder as you go along the life cycle. So I agree. In some cases, this, I understand it and I've done it, and it would make sense to me. But you have to know that if that's your operating model, you're going to back yourself into a corner, and the change just becomes more complex and more unmanageable.
So going in, that it really is not a one size fits all, going in eyes wide open, case by case, which from the risk perspective, Jen, do you have a similar point of view based on the risk side? So are you comfortable from the risk standpoint to find those, again, Band-Aid shortcuts, how to help get there in short term versus taking a step back and maybe setting it up for long term, though knowing it may take longer to launch that new product?
Yeah, so I think my answer is going to be it depends, and a lot of what that exposure leaves you with, and how that aligns with your risk tolerance. I'll say, though, to go back to some of our earlier conversation, the hope is that you reduce these situations, again, by aligning risk closely with the goals and strategies of your business lines, right? And so hopefully we don't have a lot of surprise situations. And if I think about some of the projects we've done, right, the earlier and more frequent you engage with risk, the more we can see and have visibility into where you're going, and can be a little bit more proactive about getting there, so that, when we come to that launch, both sides are ready to go. So hopefully you can mitigate some of that happening through frequent communication. We don't want these things to happen, but they are going to happen. There are going to be things that we're not going to get comfortable with, and that's got to be part of the equation. There's got to be an honest assessment of your capabilities in the end. And sometimes it might be the right approach to wait and see. Other times, maybe there's other mitigants you can put in place. And I think ultimately you've got to do an analysis of, does that introduce too much risk, too much cost, too much friction, and make your determination. Maybe there's a way you can mitigate risk with, maybe it's a smaller launch, right? Or more of a pilot, so you can kind of take those lessons and iterate them instead of going, all out at scale on day one. So there are, I think, tactics you can use to help here. But I am not surprised to see that risk will hold you back from launching new products or features. Again, it's not ever a place we want to be in. It's not a position we enjoy to be in. And I'll say, again, and you'll hear me say this throughout, like communication with your risk partners and your operational partners early and often to align sort of your frontline goals with all the way through is really important. And I think, something like that will help here too.
Which I love that, because that's just a great segue to move into the fireside chat, where Stuart and Jen were going to talk about very candidly their journey through transformation. And what's great about this is, Stuart, I'll probably have you kick us off with talking about your journey from the beginning, but Jen plays two different roles here. So Jen, from a business perspective, on the risk side in aligning to Stuart and his project, but then also from the risk side, Jen having her own transformation project. So we'll dive into both, and really understand both of those journeys and what those look like. So with that, Stuart, I'm going to ask you to take us all the way back to the beginning and talk about your digital transformation project, your journey. What was your business case? What was your driver? And, start from the very beginning on how it was laid out. And then if you could walk us through your journey.
Yeah, happy to share that. And I enjoy hearing Jen talk to me about the stuff I should have done. No, not really. I hopefully as we go through this, you'll hear the sort of close relationship that we built up with many of our colleagues in the bank. So I joined the bank about 4 years ago. As Jen said, sort of 95-year-old bank, very sort of conservative history, never had a losing quarter. About 5 years ago, we had a new CEO came in, and it's a chap I'd known for some time. And my background had been a couple of fintechs over the years, and Ira and I, who's the CEO, had a conversation about the transformation that he wanted to take Valley through or begin that journey. And really, one of the big things I heard in that conversation was we've got all these things that we want to do, but we don't know how. And, Stuart, I think you do know how, or you're going to know some people who know how. And that's always sticks with me through my time at Valley and many conversations, because people outside of the industry obviously look at banks and think, that we're there for the taking, and fintech's going to disrupt banking, and really, actually, most of the people that you meet in financial services, it's not that they don't know, it's really the how side of the equation here. So there've been many kind of transformational initiatives that we've had at the bank, but the one I'll share here is we had begun a process of trying to transform the way that you could open an account with Valley, and specifically online account opening. So Valley had never really been a digital institution, certainly didn't have many sort of digital natives, and had embarked on an account opening project just as I joined. And actually, really, that was a case study in what not to do. And so for me, it was a very interesting way of really getting under the skin of some of the challenges within not just Valley, but financial services. And I think some of what I saw was the subjects we've been talking about. We'd created a fungible team, brought it together, started a project to implement a technology, implemented it, disbanded the team, and then we were struggling to understand why it wasn't effective. So we had a very, very low conversion rate. people opening really even the simplest deposit accounts. So one of our kind of observations as we looked at the kind of situation and thought, you know, how might we really transform the way that we open accounts at Valley was just that, like, let's take this back to first principles. Let's think about what opening an account should be at Valley, and to think across not just a particular channel or a mode of opening accounts, but actually to think about the way that our customers would interact with us across the ways that we support them, whether it's digitally or in branch or over other channels. And so that really was the beginning of this process here of saying the wrong place to start here was just to think about opening, you know, high yield saving accounts online. And the right way to think about this was start with a customer and a customer's journey and what their various interactions might be across that journey, not just on digital, but in branch, not just on deposits, but on credit cards and on lending. And then to think about what those capabilities might be that would support that. That really forced us to get into a process of thinking through that, like the first principles, using product speak of that account opening process. So if we came to this thinking we want a transversal capability here, whatever technology that we put in place here, we want it to serve our customers online or in branch, or, you know, even over the ATM or over the telephone, whatever. That what are the processes that we would need to support? What are the things that we would must do from a regulatory point of view? What are the things that we would like to do, and so on? And that began really a process of creating the principles for us around this account opening experience. That led us then to think about, well, as we go through KYC or IDV or AML or any of these processes, that we should be capable of considering product context and channel context, and starting with that end in mind. And as we put those, you know, principles on a whiteboard, then the real kind of crux of this is that you have to shift everything left here. So at this point, if we're mapping this stuff out and we have principles here for our transformation, the beginning of creating that persistent cross-functional team has to start. Like, we have to shift everything left. So in the sense that normal projects will go through, you know, requirements gathering and then writing this stuff out and then sending requirements for review and then building something and then getting our colleagues to review what has been built. When I say shift left, it's like, no, actually, I want Jen at the table. I want our info security people at the table. Like, I want my technologists at the table. I want the product owners at the table as we talk about and agree these principles, and then start then in a way that we were thinking very big there, that we would shift our focus and start small. So we had our end in mind and we had a big vision, but that we narrowed it right down. So at that point, it was like, the way to start here is to pick a channel. So we picked digital, and then just pick one product. And let's start this process. Let's start the process of, you know, making the right technology choices and finding the right partners to support the outcomes that we were trying to achieve. And let's really bound the context here by saying it's just digital now and it's just one account, and we want to move fast, and we want to ship this thing and get it going, and then we want to build those lessons in as soon as we can. So again, not asking for a massive transformation project budget, but actually just saying, we're going to do one thing, we're going to go and do it, we're going to test and learn as we go, and then we think it solves the big problem, and here's how we're going to measure that. And if we meet certain criteria, drive certain outputs and drive certain outcomes, then we'll like start widening the aperture a little bit, adding more products in, adding more channels, and going from there. And that was really our approach to this particular journey that we went on. So we moved pretty quick, to be honest. I mean, we went from decision on technology to live in one channel with one product in under 5 months, which was, fairly revolutionary in the sense of the previous project that I'd inherited had been like a 2-year thing in the making. And we were able to move that fast because we had a small team engaged early with a very sort of constrained kind of objective, outcomes that we had defined and we looked to measure, and this sort of constant iteration with this persistent team as we went along. I'll pause there.
So thank you. And that's I love that viewpoint of, instead of just waiting for a 2-year project or 2-year journey to just rule everything out at once, if you cut it down into smaller pieces with very intentional focus with a smaller group, then you also may not have that overwhelming of, we're trying to do so much. And then even Jen, I'm going to guess from your perspective, the risk being so incredibly high if you're trying to do it all at once, for you and your team to evaluate as well. So as you were partnering, what I'm hearing, engage with the risk team early. So as you were engaging with Stuart and team, was it, I guess I will say, easier for you and your team to provide support when then it was narrowed down to digital, just on a single product?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, right, we there's some cliche out there that the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And I think that applies here too. So if you're starting with one product, maybe one customer type consumer, right, then that certainly narrows our focus as well. And so, the types of risk we need to mitigate are going to be a little bit more narrow, and the types of things we need to think about. It also allows us to take the learnings from that maybe smaller population or lower risk population and apply it as we roll it out. And so the process should become smoother and quicker as we go forward, right? And so it allows us to take, whether they're, hey, training issues or policy and procedure issues, or, maybe there's a new risk and we need to plug a new tool in there, or, it allows us the time to start to take those learnings and build upon them so that we're ready for those next steps. And then you add in new risks, like maybe commercial comes next. And this whole time we've been building up to consumer, we know Stuart's looking at commercial. So again, we're aligned at the hip here. We know where he's going. And so it's given us time to go out and vet, well, what do we need to think about when we're trying to onboard a commercial customer through a digital channel, right? What kind of tools can we deploy to help us mitigate that risk? And so again, I think sharing that vision and taking sort of this iterative approach, it does help. So I approve, Stuart. Good work.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the interesting things that you get into in this journey is, we talked about culture, but there's something that I call like the digital operating model. So you don't just change the way of working in terms of like how you deliver this stuff, but then there's the ongoing ownership of this, and certainly like we've learned lessons here at Valley, not just in this example. So there's quite often, I think, in banking, like this sort of technology fallacy, right? It's all about selecting whatever the top right Gardener latest thing is that we're all chasing after, so it's Encino or it's this or it's another. And honestly, mostly this is about people, and it's about culture, and it's about ways of working. So there's the delivery of the product, but then there are the ways that we do things around here change, like with these new tools. And so, in the past, a lot of the tool chain or the tool set would be set and forget, right? You're going to set your risk tolerance level, or we only approve credit on FICO scores above 700 or whatever. Whereas as you get into the new, more modern tools, this is a constant operation, right? And it's a different job tomorrow than it was yesterday. And so those have been some of the kind of interesting things to watch us learn as we do this. And Alloy would be one of those examples, right? Like, you don't just set Alloy up and then walk away from it. You spend time with it, and you spend time with the team, and you watch and you learn, what your customers are doing, what the good guys are doing, what the bad guys are doing, and you adjust and adapt and inspect and adapt as you go.
And especially with your viewpoint of starting smaller, or with a piece of that, really affords you the opportunity to then learn the solution and how you want to deploy it across different business segments as well. That's great. I want to shift just a little bit, Jen, because I think you're going through a transformation project as well, a transformation initiative, and from a risk side. And so could you talk to us about what that looks like? Again, just a different viewpoint from transformation, not necessarily as a business partner, but really in your area of expertise.
Yeah, sure. So I think much in the same way we talk about this focus on client experience, and in our world, there's also a focus on what our associate experience looks like. And, to some of the earlier priorities, how do we also, focus on our associate experience and reduce some of our operating costs and create efficiencies? And so our transformation was really about how do we automate high volume, low value work so that our associates can spend more time working on the things that they want to work on, which is, maybe less false positives and more thinking about how we enable a framework to onboard customers through a digital channel, right? So those types of things. So we focused on looking at processes like RPA processes and leveraging those from, again, all maybe the same vein of digital, but looking at how we can automate some of our processes across both the fraud and the AML teams so that folks don't have to go in and pull account opening documents or check images or wire details and things like that. How do we pull all of that together so all I have to do is show up and do the analysis? And so, we successfully deployed some of those processes, and they've made a big impact on that associate experience. The other thing we focused on too was leveraging machine learning tools to reduce false positives, because it is such a significant issue. And the risk with that also is complacency, right? When you've got people who do nothing all day, but say this, that there's nothing to see here, nothing to see here, then when there really is something to see, they're not focused on it. So we looked at deploying machine learning to help us reduce false positives in that space. And I think to Stuart's point about looking at things transversely, for us, it became really important to leverage tools that could be used across different business units and for different use cases, right? As a mid-sized bank, we don't have the scale and the volume of hundreds and thousands. We have enough to make it a pain point, right? But that business case might be sometimes challenging when it only equates to like an FTE or 2 or 3, right? But by selecting tools that can be more transversal and can sit across those silos and be used by different business units for different use cases, we can drive down that total cost of ownership and improve our business case and have a better chance of success. And so that's what we focused on as we looked at our processes. And I think the feedback from the associates on the team has been positive. We also engaged our risk partners early. And in these cases, that meant our OCC regulators, it meant our model risk management teams, right? So they were engaged with us along the way as we deployed these new platforms. So, we heeded our own advice here a little bit. But yeah, I think it's been a really successful transformation. It's been, we've had our regulators pressure tested a little bit, and it's been a positive experience. And I think a positive experience for our associates, because it helps relieve the strain on them and enables them to focus a little bit more on the things that they want to be working on.
Which, when time is so important to an associate that is looking at these alerts day after day, minute after minute, time is precious. And so if they have to go and click into a bunch of different systems, or maybe they get logged out because it times out and they have to go sign back in, pulling it all into a centralized location providing them more tools to be more efficient is also going to help with their just organically the culture too. You're building that culture among the employees. And I love that you brought up your risk partners. So from a regulator standpoint, because I think oftentimes when we talk about, with banks, we talk about initiatives that are taking place with a line of business and making sure that they're engaging the risk partners, but there's a whole nother set of risk partners that engaging them early and often can help you along your journey. And as you said, Jen, I mean, perfect. When you're pressure testing that with them, then they become part of your journey, which I think is really important. So I want to ask, before we move in, I think we've hit a lot of keys to success here. Before we move there, if either one of you have like a top challenge that you had, maybe just one, along your journey, did you have a top challenge that you faced and how did you resolve that?
I saw someone asking a question about budgeting and so on. So one of the challenges is this shift in funding model or budgeting. So the fact that banks are so rooted in this sort of project culture, and we're going to fund a project which has a start and stop date, and actually what we're talking about here is like a persistent opportunity where we're going to eat a spoonful at a time, does mean that you have to take people on a journey here in what that means, right? So we're not going to fund a project, we're going to fund a team, and the team is going to be driven by outcomes. So we're going to measure those outcomes. So, in this particular case, we were talking about the amount of deposits that they were going to gather. The sort of leading indicators that we had was their conversion metrics through the account opening funnel. So it's not like we're funding a team just to do whatever they feel like. It's like we are driving that team, but we're empowering them and pushing the kind of how down to them. And then from a technology spend point of view, it's a challenge as well, right? Because actually, a lot of these platforms can be SaaS platforms. They have a very different kind of charging model, right? So they're going to charge you on an API call. They're going to charge you on volume. And that conversation can be quite an interesting one with your financial colleagues, because, you're going to project some kind of forecast here and some ramp up of spend. But again, it's a folly to be projecting that way out. I can't tell you what we're going to be doing in 3 years' time. Like, I can project over the next 3 to 6 months, and then post 6 months, I mean, we can all pretend we know what's going to happen, but none of us do. So those were some of the big challenges in like shifting mindset in terms of like, how do we budget for this?
That's great. Thank you. Jen, anything from your point of view?
I mean, maybe I'll just go back to culture, right? I think, again, when you're going through all these big shifts in thinking and transitions, I think if you ignore the culture component, right, you're gonna introduce a friction and a tension, and it's, if you don't address it, right, it's gonna create issues. So I think making sure you address the culture part of it, and to me, again, that means making sure your stakeholders know where you're going, what your goals are, what your challenges are, what your strategy is, and making sure everybody's aligned and has a sense of ownership in this initiative. It's not, our view on risk here, or at least financial crime risk, is the answer isn't going to be no, right? It's going to be more of how can we get comfortable with, and then if the end of that decision, it maybe is, it doesn't make sense because the business case isn't there anymore, because it's going to be too costly, or take too many resources or technology that we don't have in place, then we'll get there. But it's a shift in thinking from hey, this is just a black and white question, to more of a how do we enable, how do we get comfortable, and then does it still make sense at the end of that equation? So I think to all of our earlier conversation, it's a journey to bring folks along that shift in thinking. But you've got to make sure you do it, otherwise you're going to create friction.
Which is a great point, because I've heard a lot as we're talking about culture and bringing folks along, and like, what are the keys to success? And so Jen and Stuart, these are some of the top items that they have looked at as keys to success along their journey as we go through. And, I heard about first principles and the culture and bringing in your risk partners early and often, but do not also forget your regulator risk partners as well, not just internal, but go along the journey together as partners instead of just on your own and then bringing folks into the party too late, where then they maybe have to put up a wall that they cannot partner with you to get you there. Because at the end of the day, Jen and team would want to evaluate that risk, right, Jen? You really want to evaluate the risk of the initiative while finding that happy path to continue going. So socialize the vision and goals, future-proof with a transversal strategy. Stuart talked a lot about the transversal strategy, and I actually love this term. Stuart, I might have to take this one, but it's great because it's not just, okay, digital, it's what else are you going to want to do in the future? Really looking at future-proofing or making that investment in the future across the enterprise. Really be strategic with how you're going to set that alignment up, and where can you find synergies, even tactical, where historically maybe they were not aligned, but now you're going to align them because it makes sense. It's again a new vision and a new way of thinking. So with that, I do want to provide a few tidbits on Alloy and how Alloy can help from an identity decisioning platform. So what Stuart and Jen talked to us about, their origination experience, fraud and AML, Alloy, an end-to-end system for identity. So really started 8 years ago, born from originations where our founders, they were involved in payment processing and working for a payment team. And their observation was that things were not necessarily aligned, that there was a lot of friction with clients and client experience was lacking. And how can there be more automation? So therein-born was Alloy, and really from onboarding. So Alloy is a platform, and really we even have end-to-end. So beyond onboarding, with how we started, also offering transaction monitoring, credit underwriting, case management. And so Alloy's value, when you think about future-proof, is Alloy has pre-built integration to over 180 data sources. So when you think about the Lexis, Prove, Centilink, the major credit bureaus, the list goes on. So then you can select who you think may be best in class for a particular strategy or particular layer, and you can have both fraud and KYC setting in one workflow. And as Stuart talked about, maybe they started with digital, but Jen said, hey, we knew he was going to go to commercial. You can set different strategies within the Alloy platform, different risk tolerances, and maybe different step-ups, help clients to self-resolve through document verification, step up from a phone perspective. And so as you help them along, it helps you to self-resolve where there can be automated approve, deny, even if you want to have your associates work alerts, maybe of medium risk. You can do all of that in the platform, and it's in real time. So if you right now have a workflow where it takes several days to open an account, or some manual processes or Excel spreadsheets, that can be transformed into one and with a single API call. And so because Alloy already has everything built in, you'd be very agile and very flexible. Critical piece of infrastructure for over 350 clients. This is just a high level on some of the clients that have integrated us, certainly being 350, there's a lot more than that. And this is just a snapshot of what the customizable workflows look like. So within Alloy, you can see this would be a workflow that you may start, but then you have your workflow built in your outcomes, albeit denied, approved, manual review, and then coming off of that manual review, you may approve or deny different solutions and different risk tags. And all of that data is available to you that the vendor returns from a data source perspective. So you can use and even use data from multiple sources that we're integrated with if you want to create your own custom model. So a lot of flexibility within the platform, which really helps with that future proof of you make the investment, and as the ecosystem changes, you can change with it and not have to set up another initiative to then go integrate yet another solution. So a brief highlight on Alloy. And then I know that we had, Stuart, you answered one of the questions, and I see another one, which is actually Alloy related that I want to get to before we run out of time. And that is, if we already integrated with a vendor, but want to use them through Alloy, can we do that? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So if you are already integrated with someone that we have pre-built integrations with, then you would share with us your credentials and we could plug those credentials in. And that's a way that you can still use Alloy while still using your existing contract. But if you choose to, maybe it's a new vendor or you want to have that contract through Alloy, then you can do that as well. So either way, Alloy can help to support you. And for the ones we also provide on many reseller and on some pass through, but again, many different options there if you were looking to keep your existing or if you wanted to move over. So with that, I want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining. I know we are coming right up on time. A really big thank you to Stuart and Jen for joining us today and sharing your stories and being very candid about your journey and some of the keys to success, because all of it really lends to the future, the threat environment, how to make sure that you set yourself up for success with risk in mind. And I also want to thank the CBA for having us today. And thank you to all of you for joining. This has been great. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, we must conclude today's program. The session has been recorded and will be available within 3 to 5 business days. On behalf of the Consumer Bankers Association, thank you to our speakers and of course, all of today's participants. Have a great afternoon. You may now disconnect.